think we'll give it a couple more minutes before we get started. All right, I guess we will go forward with starting. People are starting to trickle in. Thank you everyone for joining. Today's webinar will focus on tips and tricks for mentorship within solid organ transplant pharmacy. Today's discussion is supported by the ACCP, TXP PRN, and the AST Transplant Pharmacy COP. My name is Emily Sartain, and I am a solid organ transplant pharmacist at the University of Colorado Hospital in Aurora, Colorado. I practice an adult heart and kidney transplant outpatient. It's my pleasure to be moderating today's webinar to showcase these amazing mentors that we have today. And now I'll pass it off to my co-moderator, Barrett.
Hey y'all, I'm Barrett. Thanks, Emily. I'll be co-moderating this session with my coworker, colleague, and friend, Emily Sartain. I'm a transplant pharmacist who primarily focuses on the kidney transplant side in the outpatient clinic with Patrick Clem, who's, I believe, joined us today as well, and who's one of my mentors. I practice, or it's a pleasure to moderate with these amazing individuals today. And then we'll get into a little bit of housekeeping. Once I'm done the housekeeping piece, we'll turn it over to our panelists. First and foremost, audience members, please make sure you're muted for the entirety of the presentation. If y'all are first on Zoom or haven't been on for a hot minute, the mute button's in the lower left-hand corner. Please feel free to message me directly if there's any technical difficulties or you have any questions. If there's at any point questions for the panelists, feel free to send them through the direct chat feature where Emily and I can both see them, compile them, and then present them to our presenters. This webinar will also be presented on the ACCP Transplant PRN YouTube channel. So next, I'll hand it back to Emily.
All right, and then next slide, we're going to introduce our speakers for today. First up, we have Dawn Pluckrose. Dawn is an abdominal transplant pharmacist at Tufts Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Her current practice includes inpatient and outpatient coverage of adult kidney and liver transplant recipients. She has served as a formal and informal mentor for pharmacy students, PGY1 and PGY2 residents. Next slide.
Idris Akubu is a solid organ transplant pharmacist at VCU Health System, where he also serves as the program director for the PGY2 solid organ transplant pharmacy residency program. Over the past decade, he has mentored numerous students, residents, early career practitioners with a deep commitment to shaping the next generation of transplant pharmacists. Also, a fun fact, Idris is a huge fan of dim sum.
Next up, we have Kayla Joyal. Kayla is an abdominal transplant pharmacist at Massachusetts General Hospital and also previously served as residency coordinator for their PGY1 program. Next up.
Next up, we have Lindsay Bowman-Anger. who serves as the clinical coordinator for solid organ transplant pharmacists at Tampa General and maintains an active clinical practice as an abdominal transplant pharmacist. With over 18 years of experience, she has been dedicated to mentoring students, residents, fellow pharmacists, fostering growth through both structured programs and informal guidance. She's passionate about supporting others and their professional journey and helping shape the future of transplant pharmacy. Also, Lindsay paid me to say this, but it's so true. Oh, I took it out. Lindsay's so cool. There it is. All right. Now we've gotten to know our panelists a bit better. We're going to start with, first and foremost, what is your mentorship style? And first up is Lindsay, the one who's so cool.
Thank you, Barrett, for that introduction, Emily, as well. So I will say that my mentorship style has really evolved over time. I feel like when I was early in my career and a mentee, I sought out more of a expert advisory type of mentorship from my mentors. So I would often go to them saying, what should I do? How should I deal with this? What should I say? What would you do? And I feel like from having that mentorship early on, I then emulated that when I became a mentor to kind of the early mentees in my professional life. Since then, I found that I've kind of grown and adapted to hopefully providing more of a situational mentorship style. So, seeking first of what the mentee needs from me. I feel like this generation of learners, or the more recent generation of learners, have done really well with kind of reflecting on what they do need, what are their short and long-term goals, and typically come to me with those types of direct questions. So maybe I'm not providing as much unsolicited feedback as I was early on in my mentorship style, if you will. I'll also say that I've been really fortunate to nowadays have a lot of peer mentorships. I have a shared office with a lot of amazing solid organ transplant pharmacists. We all really mentor each other. I learn a lot from them every day. I have mentors across the United States that I become very good friends with. Many people that are on the panel today, as well as Barrett, who thinks that I'm really cool. I think the same about him. So I love that my kind of mentorship has been able to evolve over the years.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next up, we have Kayla. How do you approach mentorship?
I think similar to Lindsay, the farther I get out from my own training, the more my own style grows. And even this year, registering for the WTC happy hour, I realized I'm no longer a new practitioner, which was kind of a shock to myself. But I think that with some of that time, I've kind of transitioned from some of the more formal, farm academic style, if you will, to really meeting learners where they are, asking what their goals are and how we can work together to make sure that when it comes to formal learning rotation experiences, we're meeting the goals, but also trying to meet learners or students' individual goals as well for the rotation. So I try to be flexible. And even if it's like a PGY1 who's maybe not interested in transplant, meet them where they are so that we can meet their ID goals if that's their main interest area. But be challenging yet supportive. I will push people out of their comfort zone, but I will be there with the donut or a bagel in the morning if it's a particularly hard day. So definitely some balance in my style, and I'm still continuing to grow. I think something else is learning how you can seek mentors even outside of pharmacy as I get further on in my own career. So ever evolving, ever seeking feedback from my learners, and always giving feedback to my learners. I'm a big fan of Feedback Fridays and feedback sandwiches.
Thanks, Kayla. Idris is next up.
Yeah, very similar to Kayla and Lindsay. An individualized approach to mentoring, really focusing on the needs of the mentee, and evolving as the needs of the mentee also evolves. And I think I benefited, significantly from that approach. And, I think it's an approach that really allows us to have a more holistic approach to mentor-mentee relationship, where we're not focused just on career building, but also aspects of personal life, and trying to have that sort of, professional work life integration or balance, however you want to have it. But really just, focusing the approach on the needs of the mentee, where they are, and as their own, individual career goals evolve, being able to provide that mentorship as they evolved, and knowing when to also tap into my own network in terms of the mentors that I've had, and perhaps, identifying individuals that may better suit them throughout their own career journeys.
Yeah, I think you definitely highlighted the expansive role of a mentor that can expand even beyond clinical knowledge, et cetera, but helping plan for personal growth from a family aspect. Also, like we have several mentors too who help out with financial planning for PGY1, PGY2 residents as well. So it helps set them up for success long term. Next up, we have Dawn.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of great answers so far, but some things to add from my mentorship style. I think this webinar is really like appropriately titled, because what I tell mentees that I'm either informally or formally seeing is I like to tell them to ask me anything, because there's a lot of uncertainty in navigating those transitions from student to PGY1 to PGY2 to first job. So whether it's clinical practice, salary negotiation, how to apply for a job, how to resign from a job if you're switching from positions, if you're doing it for the first time, there's a lot of uncertainty in how to do that appropriately and professionally. So I want to be able to have all those conversations with mentees and make them feel comfortable and empower them to find their own solutions based on experiences. As a mentor, I like to share my past experiences from coworkers and other pharmacists I've worked with as well, but really telling them there's no one right way to do something. There's a lot of different styles, and you kind of have to listen to everything people tell you with a grain of salt and tailor what they tell you to your own individual personality and lifestyle and what's going to work best for you. So helping any of my mentees that I mentor to find, what they're going to take from the people that they receive mentorship from and create their own style as well.
Thanks, Dawn.
All right, our next question is for Dawn, although Kayla, feel free to chime in as well. I know you're outside of the new practitioner sort of category, but you can definitely add to this. As newer practitioners, the transition from mentee to mentor can be really difficult, and I feel like it's easy to feel like an imposter when we compare ourselves to the mentors that we've looked up to so early on in our careers. So how have you navigated that transition and the sort of like imposter syndrome that comes with it?
Yes, it definitely feels strange to go from one side to the other. I feel like I'm also approaching that window of where I probably won't be a new practitioner anymore. So when I kind of first started out taking mentorship roles, I always, had internal reflection on what do I feel comfortable doing as a mentor. So it started with at the resident level, kind of informally mentoring students that I would cross, train with on rotations, and if they had interest in transplant, sharing my experiences, what led to my interest, things like that. And then as I evolved from PGY1 to PGY2 to new practitioner, I kind of just kept adding the next group that fell below me, as a PGY2 precepting and mentoring PGY1s, and then a new practitioner taking on PGY2 learners and seeing their interest as well. So I think it's important to remember that as a new practitioner, you're sometimes the best position to help some of these students, PGY1 and PGY2 residents, because you were just in their position not too long ago. So that experience is fresh in your mind. And that's a lot of what mentees are looking for. And that's probably what you were looking for yourself when you were in that position. So kind of my way of overcoming that was trying to be the mentor that I wanted when I was in that position, and not stepping too far outside of my scope too early. You're not going to be able to serve as a mentor probably to someone who's been in practice for 10 years when you're a new practitioner. So adjusting your scope and helping, starting with mentorship at the PGY1, PGY2, and student level.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of starting with where you're at and then kind of evolving as you get more and more comfortable in your career. Anything else to add, Kayla, before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, sure. I think in some ways, serving as a mentor can help you get through the imposter syndrome because it reinforces what you do know and what you've been through and helps you move on to the next goal. So it kind of goes both ways. But to Don's point, I think you're sometimes more friendly, or not friendly is not the right word, but less scary to reach out to for some of those younger learners, and trying to remember where you were and what you wanted and give back to can be very helpful.
Thanks, Kayla. Okay, moving on to our next question.
Right. Our next question is for Kayla again and Idris, but others feel free to chime in as well. The root of this question really gets at, as we have different phases of our career, and I think this was alluded to a little bit with job negotiations, resigning from jobs, etc., but even life changes as well. How have y'all been able to identify new mentors for these various phases of your career? And how have the mentors been involved throughout this process? First up is
Um,
Idris.
I can go first. So I personally have different mentors that play various roles in my personal professional life. So I'm a huge proponent of diversifying your mentor team. So solely relying on a single mentor. And I think in establishing a mentor for the next phase of your career, is you have to kind of establish what that next step in your career should be. Essentially establishing what your like 3 to 5 year career goal is, or your 5 to 10 year career goal is, and trying to identify someone who potentially can have the reach and complementary interests, and have the network to help guide you through navigating those steps, and perhaps someone who has also been through that same type of journey, has that type of experience to help guide you through that process. But yeah, I think diversifying your mentor team, identifying what your own career goals are, and then um, trying to find someone who has complementary experiences, who has the network or the reach to help navigate you through the steps of making that transition from point A to point B. I think will be the steps I would take.
I absolutely love this statement of diversifying the mentorship plan. I think that's very wise. Kayla?
Yeah, I agree. I think it takes a village to raise a transplant pharmacist. And there's different people who can complement different areas of your career, whether that's research, teaching, or clinical skills. And to Idris's point, kind of going off of, does someone you're looking up to's life look similar to the way that you want to live even your personal life, and how you choose different mentors to complement those areas? Or what can you take from one mentor, but also combine it with something else from another mentor, so that you're reaching your own career goals and making obviously the career that is best for you. So I think acknowledging that there's probably not going to be one person that you're going to seek to emulate for their entire career. And then also, to the other point, seeing outside of pharmacy, are there clinicians or people who are your surgical directors, your medical directors, that are just really great leaders, and things you can learn from them and apply to your own practice as well. And I think that point is kind of becoming more relevant for me. Everything is team dependent, but as more people do transition out of clinical pharmacy to industry, there's kind of less senior clinical pharmacists in our own group. So who can I look up to that's more senior in career, is something that I think about as well.
Any other panelists want to chime into this question? Next question.
All right, next up is a question for Dawn. I know that involvement in transplant pharmacy organizations like AST or ACCP that offer mentorship opportunities has probably been an instrumental part of your professional growth. How did you find those types of opportunities after residency, and when did you know it was the right time to take on that type of commitment?
Yeah, I would say involvement in professional organizations has been a big part of my career that I really enjoy. So I always encourage residents to get involved as early as they can. You know, there are a lot of involvement opportunities for residents at that level in the different professional organizations that exist for transplant pharmacy. But always kind of tailor your scope of involvement to where you're at in your career and your timeline. So if you're involved in PGY2, I'd say continue staying involved as a new practitioner. If you're a new practitioner that is just starting to look into professional involvement and you weren't involved as a resident, it's always a great time to start. But be careful about taking on too many responsibilities within an organization. If you're like just starting your new position, you're taking a law exam because you moved. You know, the first 3 months of a job are always the hardest. I'd say it usually takes about 3 months to get settled in a new position, even if it's a second position that you're transitioning to and it's not your first position out of residency. It's still a 3-month window usually to get settled and get accustomed to new practice and new responsibilities. So it's okay to be involved in a professional organization and attend, you know, a work group or a subgroup meeting and listen and find out what's, you know, the goals of that organization or that particular subgroup. And then once you're at a more stable period and you're ready to take on responsibility, then you can offer to kind of co-lead a project or assist with a project that's being led by someone else so that you can kind of slowly transition into taking on more responsibility. You don't want to volunteer to be chair of an organization that you're just becoming a part of for the first time. You want to start getting involved at a smaller level first and work your way up to more responsibility. I also recommend getting involved in particular committees or subgroups that you're passionate about. Because professional organization involvement is fulfilling and rewarding for some people, but it may not be for everyone. And so you want to be involved in something that you're passionate about, because otherwise it'll feel like work. And a lot of professional organization involvement isn't always possible to complete in your working hours. There is a lot that has to get put in sometimes outside of working hours if you want to be a chair or a lead of a particular committee in the future. So make sure it's something that you're particularly interested in. You know, if public policy is for you, that's the way to go. If you're not interested in public policy, but you're more interested in, you know, enhancing like clinical practice through Epic access and like different, you know, IT processes and operational things, then that's the way to go. But don't pick something just because you want to be involved. Make sure you're actually interested in it.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely hard to get out of that mindset from residency of saying yes to every opportunity, but it is very wise to be a little bit more selective and pick a time when you can really commit. All right, and then our next question.
I will say I appreciate the shout out for public policy, as important as it is for our transplant recipients, soon to be transplant recipients, et cetera. I think many of the leaders in the transplant pharmacy groups for public policy actually didn't know as much about public policy going in and really just embraced it and have made long-lasting changes that will impact patients for decades. So huge shout out to public policy. Let's see. Okay, next question. I'm going to rephrase this because even though I am technically a senior practitioner in the eyes of American Society of Transplant, I am responsive to mentorship feedback, and I got feedback about this question yesterday from one of my mentors. So I'm going to rephrase it on what strategies have you used to ensure that you thrive from a clinical standpoint? And first up is Idris.
Strategies that I've used to thrive from a clinical standpoint. I think that I learned the best from my patient experiences, right? So, you know, for every patient that I encounter, I feel like I learned something from it. But I also benefit immensely from transplant is very multidisciplinary. We have various team members, and I think every team member comes with unique perspectives that you can also learn from. I benefited immensely from my physician colleagues asking questions, being very inquisitive, and just asking questions about, this is how I approach this scenario. This is the plan that I would take for this patient, but I want to hear from your own lens as a nephrologist or a hepatologist or a surgeon. What would you do? Or, what's your perspective on this? And I think I've learned a lot from that as well. And I think being involved has also helped me expand my clinical skills. I think that professional organizations and the different education opportunities that come from them has also allowed me to stay up to date on literature and evidence-based practices, because as we know, it's with everything going on, I think it's sometimes going to be difficult for you to have the time to read any new literature that comes up and things of that sort. I also learn a lot from residents, because residents challenge you. They ask you questions. Trying to, oftentimes you tell residents, explain it like you explain to your grandmother or something like that. But you also have to ensure that you can explain a difficult concept to a resident to at a level that they can understand. So those are some of the things that I think have been very helpful to me in maintaining a strong clinical practice. I hope I answered the question, Barrett.
Glorious. So perfect. Love it. Lindsay, you're up next.
Way to shake up that question, Barrett.
No, it's a last minute switch up.
I like it. And, I was reflecting on everything that Idris was saying and 100% like agree with everything. And so I was trying to think of, gosh, what can I add to what Idris already said? Some additional things that I feel like I have grown even more to appreciate as I have, moved to a couple different positions, two to be exact, so not too many, but put myself in different situations. One thing that has really helped me grow is my colleagues. When I was at Barnes, I had my own office. I was by myself, the only transplant pharmacist in my office space. I learn so much every day just from having a shared office space. Somebody will ask a question, and I learned from that. I've learned so much more about other organ groups. So getting out of my siloed kidney and liver, abdominal world. I mean, that's where I live, but I've learned so much about heart and lung and just infectious disease and, everything. So that's been really cool. And something that I was a little apprehensive about coming over to TGH, like, oh, we're all in this office. Like, how are we going to get anything done? But I will say clinically, I've learned a ton, honestly. Another kind of big thing is getting myself out of my comfort zone, saying yes to giving presentations that I didn't know a lot about and was thinking, why did somebody ask me to speak on this? Or why did somebody ask me to write this chapter? Why did somebody ask me to be the faculty editor of the, SAP? I'm not good for this role. But really thinking it through and saying yes to opportunities that I knew that I could grow from and learn from. And so while it felt daunting in the beginning, and a lot of times as I was going through it, I always learned from each of those experiences and continue to learn, honestly, every day and with every experience.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Our next question, this one is for Lindsay and Kayla. What were the biggest challenges for you with mentorship, and whether that be time constraints, communication, expectations, etc., and how did you overcome some of those challenges? So first we'll start with Lindsay.
Perfect. I feel like kind of putting forth the expectations and what that's going to look like from the beginning is really important. I feel like that's easier to do and more of a formalized mentorship program. Allie Webb leads our mentorship program for our residency program at TGH. And I think she has done a really great job with kind of matching mentors to mentees in a formalized manner. And part of that is looking at what are the expectations? What do you want in a mentor or in a mentee? What can you provide to your mentee? When is a good time for you to meet? Like, are you somebody that just wants to meet during the workday at Starbucks, or are you somebody that wants to go to dinner through, the work week, or, getting together on the weekends? And so I feel like kind of having that planned out up front and then pairing that in a formalized way is really good. I also feel like some of the challenges are more in those, in my opinion, in those formalized scenarios. And I have been a mentor to PGY2 residents in the past, to where we had formalized meeting times and we met, and it just evolved to where they found a mentor that better suited them, just in an informal way. It didn't mean that I didn't provide them with anything, but for whatever their needs were, they transitioned more to more of an informal mentorship. And I think that making it known that that's okay, that we can start out meeting once a month or once a week, but if needs change over the course of the year, or whatever, then that's okay. And just making sure that those lines of communication is opened and there's no hurt feelings in that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like not everything is going to fit in that box that you would normally think of, especially with some of those formal relationships that you're building, and they kind of just change over time. But I also think it's great to have a little bit more structure, even in maybe some of like your informal kind of mentorships. So that's great advice. Next up, Kayla.
I definitely agree with everything Lindsay said. I think time constraints is probably one of the bigger challenges I face, and making sure everyone is on the same page, especially with, again, those more formalized residency type of mentorships. And even, through AST, I appreciate that the mentor survey always has the type of mentorship that someone is looking for, so that hopefully those pairings can match well. And I think communicating, especially when I was in my role as PGY1 residency program coordinator, where the role was a little bit more set back and the residents had also primary mentors, and learning, not everyone is always going to be a perfect personality match, and accepting that it's okay, even if your assigned mentor in the program is not who you seek as a mentor throughout the year. Those things are going to happen organically, and that will continue to happen in your career as well. So just maintaining open communication and making sure that even if the assigned mentor knows, oh, I'm actually meeting with, this person who is in my interest area and might be better to help me, that there's kind of awareness of that, so that everyone is on the same page and knows that the support is being given, maybe just not in the way that it was initially formalized.
Yeah, I think there's definitely small and large kind of mentorship relationships that we all have throughout our careers. And I think that is the last of our formal questions for today. So we're going to open it up.
We're waiting on questions. I have one. It's the hot button topic. How has technology, especially with the increasing use of AI, impacted how you mentor others? I know we've had some instances of primarily students and overuse of AI, and how have you addressed those challenges that might arise? This can go to any of the panelists.
So I'm also currently a student. So I struggled a lot with AI initially in the context of being a student, because as a student in class, we were being encouraged to use AI to become more efficient in classwork and things of that sort. And that was completely different from when I went to pharmacy school, or my previous education experience, it completely different. So it was very difficult for me to have like a shift in my ideology of the role of AI and how to really adopt it and integrate it into my day-to-day practice. I think where it becomes somewhat of a challenge is when learners are using AI for things like manuscript preparation and things of that sort. I think that's where it becomes a significant challenge um, for me, and just making sure that they're aware of the potential challenges that comes with that, and making sure they're also declaring if they're using AI that the journal is okay with that and some of the limitations regarding that. But aside from that, I think I've become an advocate for AI. I think it does help if you know how to use it well. It can help you become more efficient. Um, I think one of the tasks that I think I would imagine residents struggle with significantly is preparing for topic discussions and things of that sort. I mean, if you can find ways to become more efficient, and when we're having conversations, like you can actually spend more time reading about the context of the topic versus preparing a handout and things of that sort. So when we're actually having conversations, it can be more meaningful. I think that I approach that. I appreciate that approach of utilizing AI to become more efficient in the process of learning.
Has anyone actually used AI to create conversation simulations for students or residents? Like you can actually like plug it in, be like, I have a patient who is angry due to the care they received, and it helps simulate like how that like the responses that would be generated by that individual to help, especially if they haven't had a more challenging critical conversation by the end of their rotation with the patient. I'm just curious if anyone's tried that. I've tried it with my daughter, so that's why this came up. Not that she's a patient, but like, hey, let's go over like critical conversations with classmates. So it was all it's helpful. No.
I'm not using AI too much in my practice at all. I do know some people are using it for various reasons, like for writing appeals for like prior authorizations. I've seen people using it to summarize meeting notes. Like if when you record a meeting, it'll summarize, which that I think is actually kind of efficient and cool. So you don't have to have someone typing everything out. And I kind of am with Idris, I go back and forth on whether it's beneficial or whether it hinders student learning in certain ways. I think using it to summarize and create notes for yourself and like study purposes can be helpful. I think using it for some of those things like prioritizations and somewhat topic discussions can be helpful too. But I worry if they're using it for drug info questions, because I see it sometimes as a way of like, we had to do long division before we got calculators. So I feel like as a student or a resident, you need the practice of like critical thinking, reading articles, writing your own drug information question, because AI is only as good as the information you give it. And as a student or a learner, you don't always know what you don't know. So you have to be very careful in proofing what AI gives you. And for certain things, I don't know if learners are always there to be able to do that in the best way. But as you get further into practice, you can spot those things easier in AI and maybe use it to make things more efficient for you.
I definitely agree. I feel like also having the student or the mentee kind of read over the response that they've gotten, even if they use it just to generate ideas, just making sure that when you're saying it aloud or like reading it aloud, it sounds like in your own voice or it makes sense when you're putting it all together. Because I think the quality of some AI generation is better than others, and especially medical information can be hit or miss for sure with AI. I also had a question just for our mentors that are further out in their careers. What's something you wish you had learned earlier on in your career when you were serving as a mentor, or something you wish you would have done differently?
How do you define order in your career? Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think that one thing that I have, always asked myself over the course of my career, and I've also sought the opinions of my various mentors on this topic, is the area of research, right? And I think as new practitioners, you may get several research proposals thrown at you, or you may have several ideas yourself. The concept of, do you become a jack of all trades, and whatever topic is presented at you, you spend your time in that research topic, or do you try to focus on a particular, area, for example, ABMR or CMV, and you focus your attention on a specific focused research area and just build your skill and try to establish yourself to become an expert in that particular area. And I think that's one thing I've always sort of gone back and forth about. If I were to go back, would I have just try to focus more in a particular area? And I have mentors who have been more focused in a particular area, and they've had significant success in doing that, and they become like renowned experts when it comes to that particular area. But I've also had mentors who have been more diverse in their research efforts, and they've also had some success. And recently I was having a conversation with a mentor who has had that diverse experience, and one of his, looking back, he wishes he was more focused in an area and become an expert in one particular area, but versus being more, jack of all trades, because essentially it's like you don't establish yourself to be a content expert in a particular area. So that's one thing that I've struggled with, and I still don't know if I have come to some sort of reconciliation about it. In specifically, like, would I change my approach now and just focusing on a particular area now for the remainder of my academic career, or should I just continue what I'm doing? So I'll be curious to kind of hearing other people's thoughts on that as well.
I'll comment on that, Idris. I've had that same kind of thought myself. And, in trying to, so going back to being the faculty editor for the SOTSAP chapter, trying to determine authorship. So trying to find authors for each of these very specific chapters, I was looking for pharmacists in these particular niche topics, right? And what I discovered in doing that was, I think a lot of us as transplant pharmacists are more diversified. So very few of us are really focused on a specific area. And those that are focused, I feel like are people that have, not people, but there have been opportunities to where they have published something that really was, changed the landscape of treatment. And a lot of times it was kind of niche areas. So let's give the example for Chris Enzer with carfilzomib. He is a transplant pharmacist that kind of, in my opinion, like he was somebody I went to for many years for AMR. And that was in part because he published the lung transplant paper that a lot of lung transplant programs will use carfilzomib for AMR. And so I feel like, sometimes people just not fall into those, but make those opportunities. And it's not always an opportunity for every transplant pharmacist to have kind of a niche area. One thing to, answer Emily's question, one thing that I have learned over the years is that it will take some time. So I think it was Dawn that was saying, it takes about 3 months until you get settled. I feel like moving from my residency experience at MUSC to where the pharmacist was, making all of the plans, and everybody was looking to them for the recommendations, and all the recommendations were accepted. And then going to Barnes as a new practitioner, it was kind of like I got shot down a few times, and it was like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're supposed to accept my recommendation. And it took a little bit to get settled, like Dawn was saying, and probably longer than 3 months. And so I feel like and I felt the same thing when I left Barnes after 8 years and came to TGH. It's like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're not listening to me? Don't you know that I, did all of this at this great transplant center, and I know what I'm talking about? And so I had I had big growing pains when I moved, even as somebody that had been practicing for 8 years. And so I think for new practitioners, and even those that are moving, careers, or even just from one institution to another as a clinical pharmacist, it will take some time to get settled and to get accepted by the new team, even if you have been practicing for a while.
So we have a question from the audience for the panelists. Have you all noticed a difference in mentoring those from the Gen Z generation versus the millennials? And if so, how have the needs differed, and how have you addressed those needs? To be prepared for Gen Alpha next. Come on.
I think this is a conversation that comes up in my residency program often, just with the new generation of, well, like since the pandemic, I think that there's been a slight change in the graduates from pharmacy schools and the exposures and things of that sort. And I think that there is probably a difference in how do I best put this, but just difference in approach to work and things of that sort. And I think that as a mentor, I think trying to understand the differences in exposure or has helped me navigate or lessen my frustration when dealing with newer generation learners. I think that overall, I think that the landscape has changed in terms of pharmaceutical curricula and things of that sort. And I think just understanding that, I think that my expectations haven't changed, but I think that understanding that the journey for them is different from the journey that I went through has lessened my frustrations or how I manage, newer generation learners in my own day-to-day practice.
I guess being at the tail end of millennials myself, to Dawn's point earlier, sometimes it's a little bit easier to be that one step ahead and give feedback. But I think something that I've learned in recent years is how much more explicit I need to be in expectations at the beginning of rotations, or, even if it's an informal or more formal mentorship, but not related to a rotation experience, like what this, relationship is supposed to be and how often we're going to meet, and encouraging that communication. I think that's helpful, because some things that maybe I took for granted as an expectation were not something that, in recent years has been covered, maybe in pharmacy schools when there was a lot of virtual learning that went on. And then I think to that other point, like patient interactions were something that were limited during that time. So making sure that there was maybe a little bit more oversight than would normally happen when it comes to patient interactions. But hopefully we're coming out of that end of the spectrum as well now.
Shift away from Epic Secure Chat. You gotta talk to peeps. It's good. Cool. Any other input from the group? All right. Let's see. I have one more question. Kind of touched a little bit on like everyone's involvement in the residency programs. How have y'all more directed? How have your residency programs or the residency programs you graduated from incorporated mentorship experiences? I've kind of seen different iterations of how this can look at different programs, so I'd be interested to hear some examples. This is more for the for the residents from the preceptor group is what I had in mind, but I guess it could be mentorship of other preceptors.
Yeah, so at Tufts for our PGY1 program, we have a formal mentorship program where each of the residents gets assigned a mentor at the beginning of the year. And we try to match interests as best as possible, whether it's, career interests and personality interests, things like that, because they're matched within the first couple weeks of starting. So it's kind of hard to naturally have a mentor at that stage because you're very early on in the year. And they do, for the most part, stay with that mentor through the whole year. And it's because it's more formal, they're involved in their like pharmacodemic evaluations and things like that. They participate in their quarterly development plan, but they're kind of like a check-in for the residents. They attend preceptor handoffs between each rotation. So we have meetings with the current preceptor, the upcoming preceptor, and the mentor there as kind of like an advocate for the resident on where they're at in terms of their mental health and burnout and their ability to handle projects and things. So that's kind of one way we've incorporated that to assist with the resident progress throughout the year. And then residents will kind of naturally develop mentors throughout the year that they go to for more like personalized things or more career things as they develop their interests if they're not the same as what they started out in when they came. So we have some of those like informal mentorships as well.
When I was a resident, we also had a more formalized assignment, which worked out very well for me. I was happy with it, but I think that was also a lot of luck. And something we've done in recent years at MGH for our residents is a speed dating event for the residents and preceptors. So everyone meets together for a little happy hour, and then you rank, who you felt that you matched well with. And we try to put it in an algorithm. One of our program coordinators also has a husband who works in some data analysis, and he matches up the residents for us. So it's worked well so far, and it's also a fun way to get preceptors and residents to get to know each other in the beginning of the year.
Nice. As just kind of like sparked another question. Have any residency programs worked with the medical residency programs at your institution or surgery residencies outside of pharmacy? I think I've seen a lot of pharmacy programs, of course. It's working in the PGY2 programs, work so closely with the PGY1 programs, but I was wondering if others have looked at working with our medical and surgical counterparts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have we've had residents do an immunosuppression talk to the transplant ID fellows, for example, or be involved in giving immunosuppression talks to the transplant surgery fellows. But aside from that, like shared educational opportunity, not a direct like collaborative effort, towards learning. In the past, we've actually tried to do like a monthly journal club with the transplant nephrology fellows, but it just didn't work out too well because the schedules didn't align, and it wasn't very consistent in having the fellows present at every meeting, and it just didn't seem like a good use of time. So that got abolished, unfortunately. But I think there may be opportunities. But I think it's maybe tricky to kind of have them formalized, especially for the surgery fellows, because they get put into the R so often. To have something like scheduled, formalized scheduled throughout the residency year.
We don't have anything formalized at MGH, but I think that personally, one of the most fulfilling parts of my job was probably the mentorship I get to have with the surgical residents and the transplant fellows. And especially as a lot of our fellows have now come on and stayed on as attendings, it's really fun to see that progression and have kind of a little bit more of a closer relationship with them, because I helped them when they didn't know what tacrolimus was. So I would encourage that as another avenue. If someone has maybe a little bit more of that imposter syndrome earlier in their career, the surgical residents are definitely looking for help and mentorship, and that can be a good way to get started.
But
You know, Barrett, when you were saying this, I was thinking we don't have anything like that. And it would be really interesting. When I was at MUSC a trillion years ago now, we had, it wasn't a mentorship program, but we had different volunteer opportunities to where we would work at, a indigent clinic, and we would work, the pharmacy residents would work with the medical residents, and we would work together in some of these clinics. And so I feel like some of those relationships at that level versus like in the hospital kind of flourished, which was really cool. So I feel like something like that, I've not seen that done at the other two places where I've been. But I feel like something like that would be really cool to have. And it made me think of AST fellows, right? Because you get to know like and many of you on this panel, if not all of you, have attended that in the past. But all of the learners get to know each other, and it's surgical fellows, medical, as well as pharmacist residents. And so I feel like a lot of those relationships take place there. And I know that they kind of continue on for many years. And so I feel like developing something like that would be unique and beneficial to our profession and their profession as well, and learning.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see something more like that. When I was a student, I had an API rotation for internal medicine that was specifically designed to have an internal medicine rotation where there was an attending that had two med students on rotation and there was two pharmacy students on rotation, and the med students split the list. So we had a pharmacy student paired with a med student, and we'd meet together like before rounds and talk about patients, and then the med student would present the patient. We'd be there to provide our recommendations as the pharmacist, and we would kind of like collaborate before presenting to both of our preceptors kind of what our plans were. And it was a great example of like interprofessional collaboration, like care starting at the student level. So trying to like get that throughout, the resident level and moving on from there has been tough to structure in that way, especially with surgical residents that are in the ORs and things. So it's harder to find time for things like that, but it was a great experience.
thanks, y'all.
All right, I think we are closing in on the hour, so I'm going to do some of our final wrap up and housekeeping. Thank you first and foremost to our panelists today and for everyone who joined in. We really hope that today's discussion was beneficial to you in your transplant practice. Just a reminder that this will be posted on the ACCP, TXP, PRN, YouTube, and have a great remainder of your week. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks to the panelists. You're great.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.